I've worked as a podiatric surgeon for the past decade, the later half of which I've spent working largely at Sydney Hospital, situated in the Sydney Central Business District in New South Wales, Australia. The hospital accepts thousands of patients from across the country every year, and it's been doing so since it was opened all the way back in 1788. Why the history lesson, you ask? The point I'm trying to make here is that when a hospital operates for 228 years, pretty much nothing is unprecedented. However, there will always be exceptions. On the 29th of January, I was informed by a nurse that a Mr. Paul Reeson had been admitted to the hospital and was requesting for me by name. I'd performed a minor operation on Reeson earlier in the week, when he got a large shard of glass embedded in the sole of his foot, naturally. He was under the influence of alcohol at the time. The procedure was relatively simple. Overall, I applied local anesthetic and removed the shard. Thankfully, it hadn't hit anything vital. The sole of the foot has some of the most sensitive nerve endings in the entire body, so the injury would be agonizing regardless. I then gave him 10 stitches and prescribed him a basic course of antibiotics, recommending he buy some over-the-counter painkillers to treat any aching, and told him to get plenty of bed rest. To me, the whole affair seemed pretty cut and dry, so when I paced down the disinfected tiles of the hospital hallway, ready to address whatever problem had arisen, I couldn't help but feel troubled as to why he was back so quickly. Perhaps one of the sutures had broken, or he was having trouble walking. Honestly, some patients treat the phrase "get plenty of bed rest" like some kind of ancient incantation written in a dead tongue, or some other such minor issue. I began to realize that this wasn't the case when I saw Nurse Malloy, a woman I'd worked with on everything from severe ingrown toenails to bruçae, near enough the size of golf balls, standing just outside the room where Reeson was being kept, wringing her hands nervously with skin as white and greasy as candle wax. "Something wrong?" I asked, concern sounding in my voice. "I'm sorry, doctor," she said, her voice quivering. She seemed unable to make eye contact with me. "But I think you're going to have to do this one alone." "Beg your pardon?" "I'm sorry," she repeated, tears filling up her eyes. "I just can't go back in there. No, I can't do it again." This frightened me. If someone as headstrong and experienced as Nurse Malloy was shaken by whatever the hell had happened to Mr. Reeson, then it certainly didn't bode well for the rest of us. I tried putting a comforting hand on her shoulder and opened my mouth to spout some platitudes about duty, but when I saw that look in her eyes, that haunted, shaken look, I gave her a nod and dismissed her. She scuttled off down the hallway like a beetle and left me with nothing but an immense feeling of dread. And I always thought working with feet would be boring, if anything. When I heard Mr. Reeson's quiet moans of pain from around the corner, I snapped out of my childish stupor and investigated, assuring myself that whatever it was, it couldn't be that bad. Reeson looked a hell of a lot sicker than Nurse Malloy did, which was saying something. He looked like weak old lynching meat that someone had left out in the sun, but the subdued groaning and the fact that his chest bobbed up and down periodically gave me the paltry assurance that at least he wasn't dead. "It's bad, doctor," he wheezed, every word sounding like an immense struggle. "What's the exact nature of the problem, Mr. Reeson?" I asked him, trying to sound as measured as possible given the circumstances, while my eyes drifted down towards the lump underneath the bed sheets. It certainly wasn't shaped like a foot. I peeled back the duvet while Mr. Reason mustered the strength to reply, and suddenly, all of Nurse Malloy's reservations about this made sense. I could feel my eyes widen reflexively, as if trying to zoom out and remove themselves from the situation, like my mind was trying to escape further back into my skull to get the hell away from what it was seeing. Reason's foot was swollen to the size of a bowling ball, taking on an almost spherical shape. The skin was covered in tiny lesions and abscesses. The scar, barely held in place by the sutures, was about the size of a human mouth, gaping and leaking chunky, gray pus that made me think of rotten cottage cheese. Even his toes jutted out at unnatural angles, as though the severity and rapidness of the swelling had broken all the bones in his foot. My mouth was hanging open in shock. He'd been on the mend less than 3 days earlier. I'm sure he'd said something, but I tuned out before then. I was distracted by the scar and his bloated tumor of a foot grinning at me, dribbling foul-smelling gunk. For the first time in my entire decade of working in this hospital, I felt the urge to heave. Clinging onto the loose threads of my professionalism was the only thing stopping me. I was at a total loss for words. I'd never seen anything this severe. Do you have any allergies that you're aware of, Mr. Reason? He opened his mouth to say something, but instead seized up and let out a long, shrill scream, one that I'm quite sure will still be playing in my mind until my dying day. Oh, fuck, Jesus, they're moving again! He screamed in agony, barely able to move his foot. Take the foot, doctor! For Christ's sake, take the fucking foot! I stepped back in shock, feeling my heart run at twice its normal speed to pick up the slack. My eyes were fixed onto the lipless mouth on the underside of Reason's foot, which was beginning to undulate and throb until another sizable blob of grayish slime was forced out of the gap. This alone was vomit-inducing, until I noticed that the globule was moving. The thing that crawled out of the viscous fluid would look almost exactly like a gangly-legged spider were it not for its long, translucent wings. It wriggled and shook the slime off of its tiny body like a skinless dog, its visible mandibles rubbing against one another and producing an audible chirp. Once again, I'd never seen anything like this, and this time, I did vomit. Reason choked and spluttered out bloody phlegm before collapsing back into bed. His breathing stopped. His movement ceased. His frightened eyes glazed over. Reason was dead. The chirping, winged spider creature took flight and began whizzing around the room. It had my undivided attention until Reason's foot began pulsating again, like it had a little heart of its own, and with an audible squelch, a wave of these things began surging from the slimy wound in his foot, sprawling out over the bed in a black mass, and taking to the air like a living, hissing fog. I darted from the room as they began hungrily swarming Reason's corpse, screaming at the top of my lungs. It was one of the few times in my life where I could attest to experiencing pure, unadulterated terror, knowing the voracious cloud of unidentifiable insectoid creatures was just behind me. It's all a bit of a blur after that, to be quite honest. The hospital was evacuated, with only some of the patients and staff receiving severe bites and stings from the thus far unnamed organisms. When pest control arrived, most of the creatures had already disappeared, but in the roughly half hour it took for them to arrive, they'd eaten Mr. Reason down to a stack of bloody bones. Really, it's not that uncommon for spiders and other small life to take refuge in an unused shoe. It's likely that whatever the hell was in Reeson was doing much the same, and when he forced his injured foot into the sneaker it was hiding in, it just crawled between the sutures into his wound instead. The thought of it is enough to make me shudder, even now. If anything can be gained from the strange and tragic death of Paul Reeson, it's the knowledge that you should always be careful where you tread. Those things are out there now, and they breed fast. Hey guys, if you liked the video, please press the like and subscribe button. A quick thanks to Johnny Topples for letting me narrate his story. This was definitely one of the more grosser ones I've read. Please, feel free to leave a comment below and discuss. I read all of my comments. If you want to add me on Snapchat or follow me on Twitter, go right ahead. I update my Twitter frequently, and will always respond to my Snapchats. With that being said, tread carefully guys, have a safe night, and boom, money shot.